What is this? Like, seriously, I could draw something better than this on Microsoft Paint. Well, actually, no, but regardless, I don't have high hopes for Thomas the Emoji Engine, aka Season 25. But rather than go on about why the new Thomas sucks like everyone has already done, I think it's more interesting to look at why Thomas the Tank Engine appeals to so many people in the first place. Why is it that so many people who aren't even the target audience have found a connection? Today, I'm going to talk about what sets Thomas apart from other children's television shows and the formula that made it work. I can summarize it with 3 words. It was simple, but also realistic and mature. I'm sure you all have seen or heard many comments from people outside the fandom that the model era of Thomas is creepy because the faces and people don't move. And while there are definitely instances where that format creates some creepy sights, this was actually typical of British children's television shows back then. The first season debuted in 1984, when other popular British children's shows included Postman Pat, Fireman Sam, The Wombles, The Clangers, the list goes on. All of those shows had very limited movement as well. The mouths did not move, and oftentimes there would be one person doing all the voices. The only difference is that Thomas was filmed with live model trains, while those other shows were stop motion. This is a huge advantage to Thomas because it gives a realistic feel to it. I'll talk more about realism later, but this format also led to the first aspect of what makes Thomas so appealing, its simplicity. Britt Allcroft wanted the show to capture the feel of the Railway series books, and having the static faces did just that. The models look like they just puffed right out of a C. Reginald Dalby painting. It is as if someone is reading the books to a child and they are imagining the pictures moving. The stories also move at a slow but engrossing pace. It doesn't rely on putting wacky visuals or movement to keep a toddler entertained. I've talked about this before in my Magic Railroad review, but for some reason, I feel like not having the faces move makes the characters feel more like real trains, as, big shock, trains are machines, not humans. They are not some bio-infused creation that many people have made parodies about. Now, when the show switched to full CGI, the faces seemed to match with the environment they were in, so the facial movements here blended well. Unlike Season 12, where they put animated faces over the models, it just looked kinda off. Static faces with clear emotions also makes it easier for children to connect with the characters' emotions, which is a reason why many, including me, believe the show is connected with so many kids on the autistic spectrum. A child can easily identify a character's emotion and will understand why they feel that way, especially with having the narrator say, "Thomas was very cross." Honestly, those static faces with a large library made it easier to comprehend characters' emotions more than something like Barney or even Sesame Street, where the mouth of the puppets only had one movement, up and down. And another thing to add is that the faces had the perfect design, not too simple, like just putting eyes and mouth on a smoke box, but also not too ultra-human-like, like, "Ah!" Yeah, that's why I was never too fond of Clive Spong's faces. But you know what I mean. The simple yet expressive facial designs made the trains come to life, yet still capturing the overall vibes of a steam train. And that's another major aspect that I think Thomas was best at. Despite being a model series, the crew tried their hardest to make the island of Sodor look like a real place, and boy did they succeed. The trains may have had more simpler designs, but were still heavily based off of their real prototypes. They were certainly not toys, like Chuggington or this piece of garbage. But the character design was one thing, the sets were what made the show. I mean, look at these shots. And these technically weren't even solid model railway layouts. They had to be assembled on a table in a studio for shooting, then broken up to make room for the next location. I mean, they literally had to use grocery grass in the first season, not to mention having running water. This ultra-realistic vibe was achieved by excellent model making and smoke effects, which for small models looks pretty real. Don't get me started on the episodes with fog. I've said this before in other videos, but the terrifying atmosphere of episodes like Ghost Train or Haunted Henry cannot be replicated even closely with CGI. The physical world allowed for a much more realistic atmosphere when it came to certain environments, like a forest, an abandoned mine, and the bustling industrial harbor. The model work was so well done that when real-life humans were used for Thomas and the Magic Railroad, they blended in pretty seamlessly. Yeah, I better address that movie and get it over with, because it does lead into my next big point. I cringe when I think about that review I did a while back, but my general thoughts are still the same. Magic Railroad had good intentions, but the overall concept completely disregarded what made Thomas so appealing to me. The only thing different about the island of Sodor from our world is that the trains talk. Everything else is pretty normal, and that's what made it so relatable. Especially with the realistic model work, it felt like a real place one could visit, which is what Audrey intended. Magic Railroad treats the universe as some Narnia-like dimension. I have nothing against Shining Time Station on its own, but it would be interesting to find out if the film had always been intended as a mix of the two, or the studio just wanted to put it in for American appeal. The deleted scenes on the Blu-ray certainly helped the overall narrative, but it did not change my opinion at all that the overall idea of turning Thomas into a magical fairyland is a disservice to what made me connect with the show. Real engines such as the Flying Scotsman and Stepney are just other characters when they venture onto Sodor. Audrey recounted how when he was a child, he would listen to trains going by and the steam engines sounded like they were having a dialogue, such as an engine pushing from behind and encouraging the one in front. I, of course, as well as probably 99% of everyone watching, grew up long after steam trains were out of mainstream service. But I can still see trains of Amtrak or Caltrain having a conversation. Audrey based his stories off of real events, and you might be surprised that Britt Alcroft did the same for most of Season 5. Obviously, Rusty and the Boulder is probably not a realistic story, but at the same time, it was handled with such seriousness and professionalism that it's one of the greatest episodes of the show. And that leads me into my third and final point, that the classic series was handled with a great level of maturity. Now when I say mature, I don't mean it necessarily covered sensitive subjects for children like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers would. However, Thomas was mature in that it respected its audience. Even in its darkest days prior to BWBA, at no point in an episode did Thomas speak directly to the audience with some "can you see the blue house" BS. While they certainly had special features that were interactive, Thomas let the story play out on its own. In fact, Thomas had way more mature stuff in it than most kids' TV shows, and I don't just mean dark stuff. Even today, I don't know many people who know the word deputation, and I was definitely the first kid of my age to know what dignified or celebrity meant. The morals of the stories were always applied in a practical way, not being shoved in the children's faces. For example, Henry refuses to come out of a tunnel because all he cares about is his paint getting wet instead of the passengers, so he suffers the consequences of being a lazy ass by being shut up in the tunnel. Thomas and Percy are stupid enough to deliberately disobey safety orders, and big shock, get into an accident. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that children should find out for themselves why they shouldn't ignore danger signs, but you get the idea. The emphasis on the fact that certain actions have certain consequences is a very important lesson for children, and the way it was emphasized here is much more effective than just giving a lecture about what we have learned. Ignore a red signal, you will crash. The Fat Controller always seems to be portrayed as this authoritarian dictator by people outside the fandom. While there are definitely some moments where his punishments might be a bit excessive. First of all, you can't really overanalyze something like this in a children's show. But second, have you guys not watched the show? I think the Fat Controller is probably one of the most reasonable authority figures. He punishes engines when they misbehave, yet also praises them for their hard work. Look at the James trilogy from Season 1. James is a narcissistic prick in James and the Coaches, and the Fat Controller sends him to the shed for days. However, when he does get let out, he does well with the troublesome trucks, and the Fat Controller congratulates him. The arcs of characters like James, Thomas, and especially Gordon provide a very inspiring message for children that life is a learning process. One episode that I found particularly inspiring was The Deputation. The episode revolves around a theme not so many other children's shows address, constructively but firmly trying to get an idea or viewpoint across to an authority figure. The Fat Controller wants to get rid of either Donald or Douglas, but the other engines are displeased by that. They all band together and send Percy as their deputation to get the point across to the Fat Controller in a constructive way, and in turn, he decides to change his decision. While messages about standing your ground are common in children's television, especially when it comes to dealing with bullies, the deputation is more about doing so against authority for the sake of persuasion. Now, this is not about trying to undermine authority. The engines don't gang up on the Fat Controller and hold him hostage, but rather try to constructively get their viewpoint across. This is only one of the more mature morals that the show deals with. Another example is with Henry's Forest. I really regret not putting that on my top 20 episode list, but I didn't really like it as a kid. As an adult, however, Henry's Forest is a true masterpiece, and I think it really captures that simple but mature vibe. The forest is not destroyed by human activity like something like the Lorax, but by nature itself. It's absolutely devastating to Henry, but when new trees are planted, he learns that an end can bring a new beginning. This is a very simple concept, but it is the idea that when one door closes, another opens. That theme could be applied to real life in countless scenarios. Heck, especially apparent during this horrible year of 2020. I don't think I need to tell you how gut-wrenchingly emotional the music is in this episode, but I cannot think of any other show that had as much effort put into its music than what Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell did with Thomas. Not only is the theme song hella catchy, but they gave each character an iconic theme that just wouldn't get out of your head. To add to that, the themes evolved just as the characters did. I think Percy's the greatest example. His theme in Season 1 is very bouncy and jazzy, reflecting his cheeky persona, but in Season 5, the theme was rearranged to be more determined, as it emphasized Percy's hard-working character in the season. The music also brilliantly captured the tone that the episode needed. The piece in the Diseasel is very fast-paced and cartoony, fitting the bat-crazy prank Bill and Ben are playing on Boko. Henry's sad theme captures the despair that he is feeling, while the Flying Kipper emphasizes the winter wonderland of his early morning journey through the snow. And then there's the spooky music. As I've said before, the piece where Henry first puffs by the station in Haunted Henry is probably one of the scariest pieces of music I have ever heard, period. People who claim that Thomas the Tank Engine is a brainless baby show have clearly not seen Season 5. I mean, what other show has a train falling off a bridge to its presumed death, or engines getting saved from basically being incinerated, or an engine being left in a shed for years as a landslide buries him? As stated before, the characters are locomotives, not humans, and in real life, machines get scrapped. Audrey kept this dark idea present in his stories, but never really to the point where it was disturbing for the audience. Even some of the more ridiculous ideas were treated with such maturity that it didn't take one too much out of the Sodor universe. Rusty on the Boulder on paper sounds like a ridiculous cartoon cash grab, but the episode was given such a haunting atmosphere with a supernatural feel that worked brilliantly. Thomas and the Jet Engine has the complete opposite tone, but it was treated tastefully as just a fun runaway story with some of the funniest moments in the show. Compare it to Up, Up, and Away from Season 15. Both episodes have extremely ridiculous ideas, but the difference was that a runaway jet engine had a purpose for the story. It used that crazy idea to its advantage. Up, Up, and Away, on the other hand, had nothing going for it. The idea of two engines carrying massive blown-up balloons could have potential for ridiculous humor. Like, what if the balloon took off and floated away with Thomas or Percy? But the problem was that they used this crazy concept for just an extremely bland story about boring friendship drama. In other words, the balloons could have been replaced with anything, and the story would have been no different. I could go on and on about the Miller era or BWBA for ages, but the major problem with both just comes down to the fact that they are entertainment for entertainment's sake. Season 13 through 16 was just recycling the most bland and insufferable plot lines, while BWBA was just about crazy visuals and fast-paced content. Just use the 3 strikes formula, replace the characters, and you have a typical Season 13 through 16 story. The classic series of Thomas tried to put effort into every one of their stories. Not all of them worked, see my top 8 worst classic episodes, but there are very few episodes that I just despise from that era. Most of those listed in that video are just an extreme meh. Even though Season 5 had some really crazy plots, as stated before, you might be surprised to learn that Britt and David still tried to keep Audrey's tradition of basing stories on real-life events. In Season 5, they consulted David Maidment for his stories from his railway experience, and that shows that the two wanted to keep Audrey's tone, mostly. I don't want to get into some large rant about why the new Thomas sucks, because you all know why. But what was it about the original series that created such a large online fandom of people who are not the intended audience? What made it appeal so much? I asked this exact question on Patreon, and these are the answers I got. For me personally, even though it was a children's show, so much care was given to the Little Blue Tank Engine. It was very simple, yet both realistic and mature at the same time, which I can't really say about many other children's TV shows. Both Audrey and the classic series of Thomas took itself seriously. It's always fascinating to see how Thomas is viewed outside the fandom or the target audience. It seems to be either seen as some random crap to keep your toddler entertained, the subject of countless train and drug-related memes, yeah, remember Thomas the Dank Engine? Or it's just commented on how dystopian the world of Sodor is. While those memes are definitely hilarious, I feel like the positive aspects of the show are never really discussed like Sesame Street. It'd be funny to see it parodied more in shows like Family Guy. The only time I can think of was that Uncle Thomas the Tank Engine. In conclusion, I'm definitely not pleased with how it's being treated nowadays, but no corporate downgrade will ever take away my childhood of dope-ass trains.